There are some secrets you carry so long they become part of your skeleton. This is mine, and I'm 55 years old now, which means I've been holding on to it for nearly 30 winters. 30 winters of looking over my shoulder. 30 winters of lying to everyone I've ever known. They say confession is good for the soul, but I'm not sure my soul is ready for what comes after I tell you this. Still, I need to say it out loud just once before I die. I need someone to know that what happened in those woods wasn't what they thought it was. Not even close. My name is John, and I tried to kill a Wendigo. What happened was terrifying, but not in the way you'd expect. I was 25 when I first heard the stories. Fresh out of the military, looking for peace and quiet, I'd taken a job as a park ranger in the Flathead National Forest, up near the Canadian border in Montana. Beautiful country. Dense pine forests that stretched for miles, mountains that scraped the belly of the sky, and winters so cold and silent you could hear your own heartbeat echoing back at you. I lived in a small cabin about 15 miles from the nearest town, a place called Whitefish that barely had 500 souls. My cabin was government property, basic but solid. One room with a wood stove, a cot, shelves stacked with canned goods, and a radio that worked when it felt like it. I liked the isolation. After 4 years of barracks and orders and the constant noise of other men's lives pressing against mine, I needed the quiet. My days were simple. Patrol the trails, check for poachers, maintain the fire lookouts, make sure hikers didn't do anything stupid. In winter, I'd go weeks without seeing another human being. Just me, the snow, and the forest breathing all around me. I met Sarah that first autumn. She ran the general store in Whitefish, a small woman with gray-streaked hair and eyes that had seen too much hardship to be surprised by anything. She was the one who first mentioned the disappearances. "You be careful out there," she said one October afternoon while ringing up my supplies. Coffee, flour, kerosene, ammunition. 3 hunters went missing last month. They found one of them 2 weeks ago, or what was left of him. Bear attack. I asked. She shook her head slowly, wrapping my items in brown paper with practiced efficiency. They don't know what to call it. Body was torn apart. But not like any bear I've ever heard of. My grandfather, he was Blackfeet, and he used to tell stories about things that lived deep in these mountains. Things that got hungry in winter. I didn't put much stock in ghost stories back then. I'd seen enough real horror in the service to know that monsters were usually human. But Sarah's face had gone pale, and her hands trembled slightly as she counted my change. "Just promise me you'll keep your rifle loaded," she said. "And if you hear something moving through the trees at night, something big, you don't go investigating. You lock your door and you wait for daylight." I promised her I would. The way you promise things to worried old women who care about you. Then I loaded my supplies into my truck and drove back up the mountain to my cabin, watching the October sun paint the aspens gold and red against the dark green pine. That was the last normal day I had. It started 3 nights later. I was sitting by the stove, reading by lamplight, when I heard it, a sound like nothing I'd encountered before. Not quite a howl, not quite a scream, but something in between that made every hair on my body stand straight up. It came from the forest, maybe half a mile out, echoing through the trees with a quality that seemed almost human but fundamentally wrong. I grabbed my rifle, a Winchester 30-06 that had belonged to my father, and stood at the window, peering into the darkness. The temperature had dropped below freezing, and a thin layer of snow covered the ground, reflecting the moonlight enough that I could make out the tree line about 50 yards from my cabin. The sound came again, closer this time. And then I saw movement. Something was walking between the trees. Something tall, impossibly tall. Even from a distance, I could tell it moved wrong, like its joints bent in places they shouldn't. The moonlight caught it for just a moment, and I saw what looked like antlers or branches or something that grew from its head like a crown of bone. My hands tightened on the rifle, and my breath came short and fast, fogging the window pane. Every instinct I had, every bit of training from the military, every lesson about survival, told me to stay inside, to keep quiet, to let it pass. But there was something else, too. A pull, almost magnetic, drawing my attention to this creature. A horrible fascination that made me unable to look away. It paused at the edge of the clearing, and I swear to God it turned its head toward my cabin. Even though I couldn't see its eyes, I felt them on me. Felt them boring into me through the walls and the darkness and the cold. Then it moved on, disappearing into the forest with a silence that seemed impossible for something so large. I didn't sleep that night. I sat with my back against the wall, rifle across my lap, listening to every creak and crack of the cabin settling, every whisper of wind through the pines. By the time dawn came, gray and cold and ordinary, I'd almost convinced myself I'd imagined it. But when I went outside that morning to split firewood, I found the tracks. They were enormous, easily 3 times the size of a man's footprint, elongated and wrong, with what looked like claw marks at the tips. They came from the forest, circled my cabin twice, then disappeared back into the trees heading north. I stood there in the snow, axe forgotten in my hands, staring at those tracks and feeling something shift in my understanding of the world. Sarah's grandfather had been right. There was something in these mountains. Something old and hungry and terrible. And somehow, I knew with absolute certainty that I would see it again. I reported the tracks to my supervisor, a man named Bill who'd been with the Forest Service for 30 years. He drove up that afternoon, took one look at the impressions in the snow, and went quiet in a way that told me he'd seen something like this before. Could be a hoax, he said finally, though his voice lacked conviction. Kids playing pranks. Kids didn't make that sound I heard last night. I told him. He studied me for a long moment, then reached into his truck and pulled out a worn folder. Inside were reports. Decades of reports. Documenting disappearances, strange animal mutilations, and sightings that had never made it into any official record. The most recent was dated just 2 months prior. A family camping near Lake McDonald had reported seeing something watching their tent from the trees. They'd packed up and left in the middle of the night, and when rangers checked the site the next day, they found the tent poles bent and twisted like someone, or something had tried to tear through them. The old-timers have a name for it, Bill said, his breath misting in the cold air. They call it the Wendigo. Algonquian legend, supposed to be a spirit of hunger and winter. Me, I don't know what it is. But I know it's real, and I know it's dangerous. Whatever you do, John, you do not go looking for it. You hear me. I heard him. But I didn't listen. Over the next 2 weeks, I tracked it. I'm not proud of that decision now, but back then, I was young and stupid and still had that military mindset that said every problem could be solved with enough firepower and determination. I studied those reports, marked the locations of every sighting on a map, and started to see a pattern. The creature moved in a rough circuit through the mountains, covering maybe 60 or 70 miles, appearing in the same general areas every few weeks like it was following some ancient path. I started setting up in those locations, watching from tree stands and rocky outcrops, waiting with my rifle and a thermos of coffee that never quite kept the cold at bay. I told myself I was being proactive, protecting people. The truth was simpler and more primal. I was afraid, and hunting it felt better than being hunted. I saw it again 3 times before I finally pulled the trigger. The first time it was feeding. I'd tracked it to the remains of an elk kill, and I watched through my scope as it crouched over the carcass, its movements deliberate and almost ritual. It was even taller than I'd thought, maybe 8 feet when it stood upright, emaciated in a way that defied nature, with skin that looked like leather stretched over a frame of bones. The antlers I'd seen before were real, massive, and complex, growing from its skull like a burden it couldn't shed. But what struck me most was how careful it was. How it ate slowly, methodically, almost respectfully. There was no frenzy, no mindless violence. It was surviving, nothing more. I didn't shoot that day. I told myself it was because the angle wasn't right, or the distance was too far. But the truth was, something about watching it made me hesitate. The second time, it saved my life. I'd been tracking it through a late November snowstorm. Stupid, reckless, the kind of mistake that gets people killed in these mountains. The storm came up faster than I'd anticipated, visibility dropping to almost nothing, and before I knew it, I was disoriented, lost, the cold biting through my layers and settling into my bones. I could feel hypothermia starting to set in, that strange warmth and sleepiness that comes right before you freeze to death. I collapsed against a fallen log, my rifle slipping from my numb fingers, and I remember thinking that this was a hell of a way to die. Alone in the snow, chasing a monster that probably didn't even know I existed. Then I heard it. That sound, that half-howl, half-scream that had haunted my nightmares for weeks. I forced my eyes open and saw it standing above me, massive and impossible against the white fury of the storm. I waited for it to kill me. Waited for those clawed hands to tear me apart like it had done to those hunters. Instead, it reached down, and with a gentleness that still makes my throat tight, it lifted me. It carried me through that storm like I weighed nothing, its body somehow generating enough heat that I stopped shivering. 2 hours later, when I woke up, I was in my cabin, lying on my cot with my stove burning hot and my rifle leaning against the wall. The creature was gone. But there were tracks in the snow outside, those same massive, impossible footprints, leading away into the forest. That's when I understood. It wasn't hunting me. It was watching me. Maybe protecting me. And I'd been trying to kill it. The third time I saw it was the night I pulled the trigger. It was early December, bitter cold, the kind of night where the air itself seems to crystallize. I'd been patrolling the northern boundary when I heard voices. Men's voices, rough with alcohol and excitement. Poachers, 3 of them, with spotlights and high-powered rifles. And they were tracking the Wendigo. I followed them, staying hidden, watching as they moved through the forest with the confidence of men who didn't understand what they were hunting. They found it near a frozen stream, and they opened fire before I could shout a warning. The creature ran, wounded, bleeding, and they pursued it like it was sport. I saw the blood trail in the snow, black in the moonlight, and something broke inside me. All those weeks of tracking it, studying it, fearing it. And in that moment, all I felt was rage at these men who were killing something rare and ancient for nothing more than bragging rights. I put myself between them and the creature, fired warning shots over their heads, told them to get the hell out of my forest before I arrested them all. They cursed at me, called me crazy, but eventually they backed off, their spotlight beams swinging away through the trees. When I finally found the Wendigo, it was dying. It had collapsed in a small hollow, its breath coming in ragged gasps that misted the freezing air. I knelt beside it, my rifle still in my hands, and for the first time I truly looked at it. Its eyes were dark and intelligent, filled with something that looked like understanding, like sadness, like it knew this was how the story would end, not at my hands, but because humans would always fear what they couldn't understand. I stayed with it for 3 hours as it died. I don't know why. Maybe because it deserved not to be alone. Maybe because I needed to bear witness. When it finally went still, just before dawn, something changed in the forest. The silence became deeper, heavier, like the world had lost something it didn't know how to replace. I buried it deep, in a place no one would ever find. And I made a decision that would define the next 30 years of my life. I would tell everyone I'd killed it. I would claim those poachers' victory as my own, let people think the threat was gone. Because the truth was, there were more of them out there. I'd seen the evidence in those reports. Different territories, different patterns. And if people knew they were real, there would be a war. A war that would end with the extinction of something that had walked these mountains long before we built our cabins and cities. So I lied. I became the hero who killed the monster. And I've lived with that lie every day since. The years that followed were strange ones. I continued my work as a ranger, got promoted eventually, took on more responsibility. I married a woman named Claire, sweet, patient Claire, who never understood why I sometimes woke up in the middle of the night and stood at the window, staring out at the forest like I was waiting for something. We had a daughter, Emma, who grew up running through these mountains like they were her backyard. I taught her to respect the wilderness, to move quietly through the trees, to understand that we were visitors in a place much older than us. But I never told her the truth. Never told anyone. Because the thing is, I kept seeing them. Not the one I'd watched die, that one was gone, buried under rock and earth in a place I won't reveal even now. But others. Always at a distance, always watching. They learned to be more careful after what happened, stayed deeper in the wilderness, avoided human contact. And I learned to recognize the signs of their presence. Subtle things that most people would miss. A particular pattern of broken branches. Tracks that appeared after fresh snow with no trail leading to them. The feeling of being watched from the shadows. I became their guardian, though they never asked me to be. When developers wanted to push logging operations into remote areas, I fought them. When hunters reported sightings, I dismissed them as hoaxes or misidentifications. I created a buffer zone, invisible but real, protecting something that most people didn't even believe existed. It cost me things. Bill thought I'd gone soft, lost my edge. Claire grew distant, sensing secrets I wouldn't share. When I retired from the Forest Service at 50, it was less a choice and more an inevitability. I couldn't keep up the pretense anymore, couldn't keep filing reports that erased the truth. But I stayed in these mountains. Bought a small house just outside Whitefish, close enough to town for company but far enough that I could still patrol the forest, still watch over them. Claire left me after Emma went to college. She said I loved the wilderness more than I loved her, and maybe she was right. How do you explain to someone that you're trying to atone for attempting to kill something that saved your life? That you're protecting creatures most people would want dead? Sarah died 10 years ago. On her deathbed, she gave me something, a journal her grandfather had kept, filled with stories and observations about the Wendigo passed down through generations. Reading it was like finding a map to a place I'd been living in blindly. He'd understood what they were. Not monsters, but survivors. Ancient beings that had learned to live in the spaces between human awareness, existing in a world that no longer had room for them. They remember everything, one entry read. Every kindness, every cruelty. They are the keepers of the old ways, and when they are gone, something vital will leave this world with them. I'm 55 now, and I feel every one of those years in my bones. The cold settles deeper each winter, takes longer to leave. I know I don't have many years left up here. Sooner or later, age will force me down to warmer country, to a place where someone can look after me when I can't look after myself. Last week, I saw one again. I was walking a trail I've walked 1,000 times, watching the autumn colors paint the mountainside, and there it was, standing at the edge of a clearing, backlit by the evening sun. We looked at each other across that distance, and I could feel the weight of 30 years of secrets pressing down on both of us. It didn't run, didn't hide. It just stood there, and I like to think it was acknowledging what I'd done. The protection I'd tried to provide. The lie I'd lived to keep them safe. Then it turned and disappeared into the trees, and I was alone again with my memories and my guilt. People ask me sometimes if I have regrets. They expect me to talk about my marriage or my career, or the ways I could have been a better father. But the truth is, my greatest regret isn't something I did. It's something I almost did. I almost killed something extraordinary because I was afraid. I almost destroyed something irreplaceable because I didn't understand it. That night I pulled the trigger, or rather didn't, changed everything. It taught me that the real monsters aren't the things that look different or act outside our understanding. The real monsters are the fear and ignorance that make us destroy what we should protect. I don't know how much longer they'll survive. The wilderness shrinks every year, pushed back by roads and resorts and the relentless expansion of human civilization. Maybe they'll adapt, find new places to hide. Or maybe they'll fade away like so many other things we've lost. Passenger pigeons, wolves, silence. But I'll keep their secret as long as I can. I'll keep lying about that night 30 years ago. Keep playing the role of the ranger who killed the monster. Because some stories need to be told wrong to protect what's true. Emma called me yesterday. She's pregnant, due in the spring, and she wants to bring the baby up here for a visit when he's old enough. I said yes, of course I said yes. And I thought about what it would mean, another generation growing up in these mountains, walking trails where ancient beings hide in the shadows. Maybe I'll tell her the truth someday. When she's ready. When the world is ready. Or maybe I'll just take her on long walks through the forest and teach her to notice the things most people miss. The broken branches. The tracks that shouldn't be there. The feeling of being watched by something that means no harm. Because that's what they deserve. Not fear, not violence, not extinction. Just the basic human decency of being left alone to live their lives in peace. I tried to kill a Wendigo once. What happened was terrifying, but not in the way you'd expect. The terror wasn't in facing the creature. It was in realizing how close I came to destroying something beautiful out of ignorance. It was in understanding that sometimes the bravest thing you can do is nothing at all, just witness, just protect, just keep the secret. And so I have. For 30 years, through everything, I've kept that promise. To a creature that saved my life when it could have killed me. To a species that deserves better than extinction at the hands of fear. They're still out there, moving through the mountains like shadows, old as the stones and just as patient. And as long as I'm alive, as long as I can still walk these trails and watch these trees, they'll have at least one person standing between them and the world that wants them dead. That's my confession. That's my secret. That's what happened when I tried to kill a Wendigo. The terror wasn't in the monster. The terror was in discovering that maybe I was the monster all along. Thanks for following the story. If you can, leave a like on the video and subscribe to the channel. It really helps YouTube share our content with more people. Also, tell us in the comments what city you're watching from. That way we'll know where our viewers are from. Check out the other stories too. See you next time. Bye.